Here's to you, hankering. Gotta love that Woodward Reserve. So, last night I ran my very first ICRPG game. As some of you may know, especially those of you if you're following me on, say, Instagram or the blog, may have known that was coming up. Some of you may not. That's cool, because I'm going to tell you what happened. It's the first thing we did. We decided fairly early on that we were going to create characters at the table rather than kind of creating them in advance. I also decided that I wasn't going to tell anybody any of the rules. We were going to learn it as what at the table. Everybody else would just learn as they went. Kind of simulating that whole thing of turning up new to an RPG, just playing it and seeing how quick it is to get. That's something I've done a lot in Dungeons and Dragons, especially in 5th edition, is teaching people how to play the game by playing the game. I still think it's the best way to learn, but it's very complicated. Especially when you're kicking off at level 5, level 6, level 7. Your character's already got a lot of abilities. So we built our characters just as is, straight out of character creation in the straight out of the ICRPG rulebook. I printed off character creation booklets, like little players' handbooks for each of the players. That way, they each had their own. They each had a rundown of the very basic rules right at the back of it. They could kind of consult it when they needed to, rather than having one big central book. Overall, it went very well. I had to explain a few bits and bobs to a few people, but it went relatively well. About 45 minutes later, we had 7 characters, 8 technically if you include Gonk the drone, and everybody seemed fairly happy. There was a really nice balance of people kind of going through the various different classes that there were, deciding which ones they wanted to play. 2 players, my wife, Kat, and one of our friends, Bethany, decided they were going to be sisters, which was a fantastic dynamic all the way through. There was a wonderful sense of kind of social storytelling before the game even began, as everybody kind of chipped in with everybody's characters to a certain extent. It was wonderful. It's something that I'll definitely be doing again. I thought it was really, it really brought the group together, gave them a sense of shared history before the game actually started. So, our characters. We had Darklighter, the Geno Ronin. Oh, we're using Warp Shell, by the way, because I love Alfheim. Alfheim's fantastic, but come on, Warp Shell. Of course we're going to play Warp Shell. I'm a 40k player. So we had Darklighter, the Geno Ronin, with his drone Gonk. We had we had Bust Rocket, who was very quickly called Busty, the mech tank. He kind of became the MVP for me, I'm not going to lie. The sisters, we had Ying and we had Yang, Fragment Psychers, basically identical characters. They kind of created slight differences between themselves, but they were twins, or they played twins, and damn, was that one of the best roleplay things, examples of roleplay I've seen in a long time. We had Dash, the Geno Blip. It was hilarious. Joe, the Reptoid Zurin, and the Zilghost Monkey Feathers, because she didn't quite understand human names when she took one. Also, my Zil player is a professional illustrator. And back to me. So, the whole premise of the adventure was the crew are aboard their warp shell. I think I'm not quite in focus there. There we go. So the crew are above their warp shell. My take on the warp shell, I think it's quite important, because warp shell isn't, at least in the primer, isn't quite as developed as, for example, Alfheim. Alfheim, to me, with it having fiction behind it, it's got the Moloch campaign. It's got all sorts of stuff that you can take as kind of definitive, in my mind. Whereas Warp Shell, I think one of the things that really jumped out to me about Warp Shell was there's so much vagueness to it. You really can, or I felt I really could make it my own, especially coming from that grimdark Warhammer 40,000 background, being a massive lover of Alien, there was a lot of bits and bobs that really jumped out to me that I thought I could take a hold of. One of those things was the idea that the warp shell, because it's basically sentient, I like the idea that it's almost like the TARDIS from Doctor Who. The crew have a certain amount of control over it, and they certainly, they at their stations, they certainly have control. They can affect what happens. However, every now and again, the warp shell is just going to do it at once, and it's going to take you where it thinks it needs to go. That's what happens here. The warp shell just appears in the middle of a debris field. Directly before the sensors is an Imperium asteroid mining facility called Epsilon-2-5-Delta. There is a single life reading coming from it, something that the crew of the warp shell haven't seen at this point in about a year. Kind of traveling through the Imperium belt and a lot of dead civilization, really. They haven't seen a life sign apart from their own in a very long time. So they go down to investigate. They come out in their short-range flyer, and they land in the docking bay of the mining facility. They have a little bit of a wander around. They look through the habitation layer. They find nothing. They begin to descend downwards into the actual facility itself. So as they move into this lower layer, the layer of industry essentially, they come into this small room. Ahead of them is a locked electronic door, and to their right is a slightly ajar electronic door. The power seems to be off in the whole facility. There's no real way of opening those doors. Bust Ruckus, who very quickly became known as Busty, he went forwards. He grabbed the door and just started yanking it open. Strength checks out the jacksy, getting that thing open. If I remember rightly, quick side note, I do have a 6-hour recording of this game. I'll listen to it again, but not now. I'm getting this to you. If I remember rightly, Yang wandered over and kind of pressed the door a little bit, and it shot open. They moved through into the next room, which was a large open cavern, evidently somewhere where the Imperium have been mining for whatever resource they were looking for in here. Since then, the floors become flooded, or the caverns become flooded. And the bridge that was once used to get around seems to have collapsed, and there's only the struts where it used to hold it up. The crew attempt to jump from stump to stump. Not all of them make it. Several of them, on several occasions, from Darklighter to Ying, then Yang. Oh, sorry, the other way around. Yang, then Ying. Dash, which is really funny because she should have just been blipping. So many people fell in. This room took so much longer than I expected it to. The whole idea was to teach the players, because I don't tend to run very mechanical games. It was to teach the players, this is what this room does. Remember this for next time. What they actually did, the Reptoid player ran across the wall and went and picked up tried to pick up a load of loot, had he not kept failing all of his intelligence checks to open the damn thing. Everybody else just spent their whole time dragging people out. Busty was just beautiful in this. Just grabbed Ying and Yang, pulled them both up, and threw them to a whole new plinth. Eventually, after Monkey Feathers, the captain of the warp shell, threw her grappling hook to the other side of the cavern, and set up essentially a little guideline to help people climb across. They finally managed to get to the other side. So they move through this cramped cavern, this cramped little tunnel, and come out in another very large cavern, very similar to the last one. A straight shot across. They find a little bit of loot in a few little crates here and there, and they start making their jumps across. Generally much simpler this time. I think there was only a couple of people fell in. They kind of learned. In fact, okay, let's just talk about this. Instead of the grappling hook, while Monkey Feathers was still arsing around trying to get back into that one. Yin and Yang had managed to make it into the second cavern. Ying opened a chest that Yang couldn't quite get open, and was really excited and was like, "Yeah, screw you, Yang," and pulled out an anchor and chain. Needless to say, she wasn't tremendously excited about this until she realised that she had levitate and could levitate the anchor and the chain to do exactly what Monkey Feathers had done in the previous room. So a load of free moves later, they finally make it to the far platform, the place where they are convinced the power for this whole area is going to be. The engineers among them, the engineers being Yin and Yang, have guessed that this is kind of more the maintenance side, and that all the really heavy work goes on through the locked door. The communications officer Dash had already scanned the planetoid and worked out where the life, or the kind of the area the life form was coming from, and they knew that was going to be through the second locked door. So they come to a computer bank. Yin and Yang both correctly deduce that this is kind of the power system for the whole asteroid, or this is where it can be engaged with. This is where it can be switched on. So they boot it up. They pile through the software, get the thing rebooted. Busty specifically basically went in and just aced his role. I think it was a natural 20 to do it. He's a cleaner and a gunner and wasn't getting any extra on the rolls. Just natural 20. His fingers just pop up with like that Ghost in the Shell style. Oh, I'm hitting my microphone. That Ghost in the Shell style. All the little fingers just typing away, and they switch the power on, and then the rumbling starts, and then the bubbling starts in the water. Dash, who's already started moving back towards across the rocks, back towards the starting point, because that's the only way out, looks down and notices that the lights have come on, and now they can see through the black, brackish water. There are hundreds of zombies, or hundreds of dead figures, surging up the water towards them. Darklighter, the pilot of the group, decided that he was going to use his drone as an outboard motor for a loot crate that he'd found. He put the crate in the water, clambered into it, set the drone on, and by some miracle aced his role, and now had a fully functioning motorboat for at least a little while. The group started making their way back as the timer ticked down. A lot of people, actually, a surprising number, got across to the original side, the way out of this particular cavern. Not all of them though. In particular, Yin, Yang, and Busty. As zombies started splashing out of the water and attacking the crew. It was at this point that Joe, the Reptoid Zurin, realised that, wait a second, maybe I can heal the zombies to death. Now, I know this question comes up with a lot of DMs, and I think it's come up with me before in 5th edition D&D, is, can I heal the undead to death? And usually I say no, but something about the way that Mike Nicholson put it to me. Maybe it was the tone of voice. Maybe I just like Mike more than the other people who've asked me. But I said yes. So he starts healing Novering the zombies to death and doing horrendous amounts of damage. These are these hordes of zombies have given 1 heart. So 10 hit points. And he's dealing 16 points of healing damage to them every turn. Needless to say, at this point, to be honest, I was the encounter was taking a little longer than I'd expected. They'd taken a long time to get there. I was kind of looking to get back on track, so I let it happen. Sue me. So they make it back to the original cavern room and find that the time they've wasted specifically attacking these zombies and trying to kill these zombies has meant that the zombies coming up in the other room have had longer. The fight is harder. They do a really good job. Guys, you did a really good job of making your way through that room, of kind of not arsing around as much, like attacking things, of kind of looking after one another and using free moves, blips like phase walking, that kind of thing. They manage to get out of the room. The crew make it out of that cavern. They sprint back through to the first room, the room that they came into with the 2 doors, with the horde of the undead following behind. The mech tank, Busty. Keep forgetting his name. Keep wanting to say Rusty. The mech tank Busty runs through and slams the door shut, and they lock it. And everybody is now safe. At this point, the 2 engineers begin playing with the other door and trying to get the other door open. They eventually do it. Again, table talk. At this point, I did have another room sorted. I did have another room planned. This room was going to be a much more traditional combat room, something that at this point was sorely missing from the adventure. I ended up having to skip it. Unfortunately, by this point, we had a deadline. We started the game around 6:15, and we knew we had to be done around 10. Now at this point, it was getting on to 8:20, getting on to 9, I think, if I remember rightly. We'd spent an awful lot of time in those initial kind of educational rooms, kind of, let's think mechanically. How do we game the system, essentially? How do we beat these video game villains? And that's fine. I enjoyed every minute of it. I just wanted to get to what I thought was going to be the climactic moment. Now, unfortunately, that meant that we missed out on a little bit of the lore behind why everything in here was happening, and a little bit of flavor, a little bit of fluff, and just a straight up combat encounter. The combat encounter was there was a room. Kind of a rectangular room, and lining it were bloated and burst bodies of miners and scientists. The whole idea being that I was going to have a blind horror stalking them in the ceiling, eventually jumping down, and then if I needed it, a second blind horror to come in if I thought that the encounter was going to be too simple. And this is something, because I haven't played ICRPG yet, I don't really understand the balance of encounters. And the last thing I want to do is give the players either something too hard or something too easy, simply because of my own inexperience. So having a legitimate reason to have a second enemy come in should it be too easy, and hoping simply against hope that a single blind horror wasn't going to be too bad for 7 players. Truthfully, I didn't think it was going to be. It meant that was there as a little bit of a safety valve for me. In the end, I skipped it because we simply didn't have time. As it was, the whole thing went on way past 10 o'clock. So what did end up happening was we skipped straight to the submarine pen. And the idea here is you have a rectangular room with a walkway around the edge, and a submarine at the bridge of a submarine at the other side of the pen. The party realise, okay, we have to go down in the submarine, and that'll kind of bring us out to where the survivor is. And they did that. They started making their way around. The Zurin monk, forgotten his bloody name, Joe. The Zurin monk Joe just sprinted, just dashed his way around, and was immediately caught by a roper. Some of my geek credentials, my PC gaming credentials, began in the early thousands with Half-Life, and those monsters have stuck with me for years now. They're nearly a decade and a half. So to me, they were one of these monsters sticking on the ceiling, tongue down, gossamer thin tongue, and when they hit you, you were stuck. And it started pulling you up into the ceiling with a D4 timer. 3 rounds and Joe would be dead. The party did a fantastic job. They ran up, they got Joe out. They didn't kill the roper immediately. But they did manage to illuminate them. They found a computer terminal, switched on the lights, which meant that they could just ignore the ropers really as long as they didn't move too quickly. By this point, Steph had learned how to use her phase abilities. Her phase walk, I think it is. Anyway, the blip thing. And she asked if she could blip into the submarine. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, you know what, like, I can understand. I read the rules text on it. I thought, no, it's perfectly fine. She's aiming for a point in space. She doesn't need to see it, but if she can't see it, then she's going to have to make a dexterity check to ensure that she doesn't just phase into something and become part of it. So I tell her this, and her reaction makes me think that she's gone, okay, let's not risk it. And then at the start of her turn, she says, can I make a dexterity check? I stop her and I say, hey, do you mean strength to kind of open the hatch? She says, no, dexterity, because I'm going to phase into the submarine. At this point, the room DC is 13, and I'm telling her, this is a hard roll. You don't know what's in there. You could just phase into there and phase into a wall and do horrendous damage to yourself. But Steph went ahead. She rolled. She did a fantastic job, and she was now inside the submarine. Eventually, the rest of them make it in there, and they all take up their places in the different rooms of the submarine. Because they're all crew members, they all have roles that were given to them right at the start. So we have the captain, which is Monkey Feathers. We have the pilot, which is Darklighter. We have the 2 engineers, which are Yin and Yang. We have the comms officer, which is Dash. We have the medic, which of course is the Zurin, Joe. And we have the gunner, which is, cleaner, but they also just put him in the gun position, which is Busty. So they take their positions and descend into the darkness. Dash on the sonar pulls up or sees an image of a huge creature in the water, and they're prepared for it, so they kind of go a little bit more slowly. They went a little bit more stealthily, kind of waiting for this thing to jump out at them, and it never did. They make it to the island where they know the survivor is. They all get up, they all get out. They decide at this point, oh yeah, actually, here's what happened. Here's a thing I nearly forgot, and I don't know how because it's massive. At this point, Bethany, who played Ying, and Laurie, who played Busty, had to leave at this point. It was 10 o'clock, they're getting picked up, and they needed to go. So, of course, Yang took control of Ying, because they're basically the same player and they're sisters, so she gets the character. And Darklighter took control of Busty. Darklighter, of course, being Stuart Webb, who is a truly wonderful man. Stu pipes up and says, could we hardwire Busty into the submarine? I get the engineers to make an intelligence check, and they can do it. So over the course of the next while, they strip him of parts and essentially attach his head to the main console in the helm. And now he has the ability to communicate with all the computers in the sub. To which Stu then redistributes all of Busty's equipment to the rest of the players, and Busty is now the submarine and irrevocably part of the submarine. So the rest of the players, or the rest of the characters, move into the island, where they see a hooded figure working at a table of scientific materials, with a huge floating brain in a jar behind him. They address him. They try and talk to him. They ask him why he's here, what he's doing, and he turns around, hood pulled over, and asks them why they're there. They, if I remember rightly, largely ignore the question and ask him why he's there. And it goes on a little bit. They each ask questions, and it comes up that that the creature refers to itself as we. Now, while they're doing this, a couple of the other players, if I remember rightly, it was Joe went up and checked or had a look at the brain in the jar and saw that it was huge. It was a colossal thing, and that it had that there was fungus floating up in the Bacta-like tank. He pretty much guessed that there was some kind of hive mind thing going on here, and began to step back. And at this point, they asked who created them. At which point, the figure replied with, "We have no creator." In my head at this point, this guy is the big bad guy. The only survivor on this whole asteroid is designed to kill them. So to skip back a little bit to the world primer, it talks about the Devourer, about how the whole point of the warp shells is to find information about the Devourer, find ways to kill it, find ways to survive it. To me, in my mind, the Devourer is somewhere between the aliens from Alien, a fungus like the Flood from Halo, and the Tyranids from Warhammer 40,000. That kind of hive mind, many individual creatures all designed to devour and then move on. So in my mind, this creature was once a scientist in the Imperium, and was chosen while all the rest of the humans here were killed or used to impregnate with blind horrors, whatever. They were all used for something. They were all devoured. They were all killed in some way, except this one scientist. The fungus kind of infects him, it turns him into something else, and the devourer hive mind overtakes him, with this brain being the driving force behind him. At this point, Monkey Feathers, the Zill captain, blips behind the figure and goes to yank the hood down. The figure dodges out the way, but the hood falls away, and they see a tentacled face, much like an Illithid. The Illithid artwork on the ICRPG card really stuck out to me as kind of, this is what I want this creature to be, in the middle of its transformation. Enraged, the creature begins to transform. Almost, I described it as Tetsuo-like. Tetsuo! The thing becomes a kraken, this huge thing, just beached on the island. The players attack it. They start hitting it with everything they've got as these tentacles just come towards them. They take a player down. They knock everybody down to low health. And at this point, Joe the Zurin healing Novas and gets everybody back up, and they book it back to the submarine. At this point, this is the bit of the adventure that I was really worried about. This adventure came at the end of a very long week. It was a week where I was only originally meant to run one game of D&D and ended up running 4. And realistically, I like to put in a lot of preparation. I like to know what I'm doing. And I really wanted this to be not just another bullet sponge enemy. Some of you may have seen, if you're on the ICRPG group, you may have seen me asking for advice, and I just want to say a huge thank you to, let's get this right, I just want to say a huge thank you to Omari Brooks, Peter Beowulf, and Hanker and Fernell himself, for kind of jumping in and giving me some fantastic ideas on this. Honestly, this would not have been the encounter that it was without your fantastic suggestions. And to be honest, a lot of it was still written at the last minute and is only just going into codification now. They're in a submarine. There is nobody in sonar at this point, so they are flying blind, which means they can't use their weapons to attack the Kraken. Their weapons are the only things that can damage the Kraken. So all the damage, the 55 points of damage they dealt to this thing when they were on the island, guys, sorry, that was basically meaningless. I was keeping track of it, but only to make you think that you were hurting it. You really weren't. What was originally going to be a fight in which they probably killed the Kraken ended up becoming this really tense evacuation. They had six rounds worth of movement between the island and the submarine pen. They could move fast if there was nothing on them. If there were no tentacles on them, they could move at a normal speed if there were up to 3 tentacles on it, and if there were 4 or more tentacles on it, then they couldn't move. And of course, moving at a normal speed is one round's worth of movement, and moving fast is 2 rounds worth of movement. So if you move fast 3 times, you get there. You get the mechanic. every 1d4 turns, not rounds, but turns, 1d4 tentacles attacked the submarine in random locations. So every room was numbered 1 through 9, and I would roll a d10 and then re-roll a 10. And man, did they get unlucky. As tentacles came in and just smashed systems and stopped engineering working and held the thing back, and players were running around hacking away at tentacles, getting things running, keeping the ship alive only just. They managed to, just about by the skin of their teeth, they managed to get back to the sub-pen. At which point, Darklighter slapped the self-destruct button in Busty's face, and they fled. The self-destruct timer could have been anything between 1 and 4 rounds. 1 round, it would have blown up. It probably would have killed half the party. 2 turns, maybe it would have gotten 1. It was 4 turns. The party ran. Busty exploded, killing the Kraken, and they fled. Unfortunately, at that point, my camera died, and I kind of want to get this out there, so I'll just kind of talk through the last of it. That final encounter was something that I really wanted to make special. I've run campaigns with these guys before, and a lot of my final encounters, even the slightly more creative ones, have been more or less a big enemy that they have to kill. And they use their character abilities, they use, all the things that a normal character would use to kill a bad guy. In this one, I really gave them no option. They had to use the submarine, and they had to work together in order to do it. The idea being that the sonar would make intelligence checks to find to actually find the Kraken, so that the gunners could fire at it, and then the gunners would, deal damage to it. Engineering would kind of repair the submarine. The hardwired mech, I decided could either run a section of the ship on its own with hard rolls, or it could make another section of the ship. It could take them from a normal roll to an easy roll. Bits and bobs like that. Basically, the whole idea was you have to work as a team. You have to work as a crew in this ship, because this is what you do. You're not adventurers. You are a crew of a starship, and this is you in a submarine doing exactly the same things. And I think it worked really well. I haven't had time to properly talk to the guys who played it. But the feeling to me was that it was tense. They did a fantastic job of rallying around and doing just enough to survive. As it was, their ship was only 2 hit points away from being sunk. But they ran around. The engineers did a great job of repairing everything. Everybody else did a great job of hacking apart the tentacles that were holding the ship and stopping it from moving. It was tense. It was wonderful. And I enjoyed every moment of it. So anyway, I just want to say thank you to everybody who came along and played. From Mike and Steph, Stu, Laurie and Beth, Louise, who played the Zill Monkey Feathers. A special thank you to my wife Catherine.
Thanks, Kat.
Who put up with not seeing me at all this week so that I could play D&D 4 times and prep it the rest of the week. She did a fantastic... She's one of my favourite role players. I absolutely love the fact that she's in my games, so thank you. And thank you to everybody in the ICRPG Google Plus group. It's wonderful being able to chat with you guys about this game. I absolutely love it. I love being a part of the group, and thank you for being awesome, basically. Lastly, Hanker Infernale, thank you very much. I love the fact that you've created this system. I don't think it's going to replace my 5e system. That's still where I live. I've never had a problem with the complexity of it. However, there are things that ICRPG brings to DMs that really benefit me, that I will definitely be moving across to 5e. That last encounter felt like I was on autopilot to a large degree. Everything was done by timer. Everything was random. It was just, I knew which dice I had to roll in what order at what time. There was no strategy to it. There was just, this is what the Kraken's doing. And it was fantastic. And it's something that I'm going to try and do in Dungeons and Dragons as well. Anyway, if you've gotten this far, thank you very much. I'm going to have a written review and a written version of everything that's here that's probably going to be a little bit more accurate to what actually happened. I'm going to try and actually listen to the 6-hour recording. But yeah, thank you. If you've enjoyed, make sure to subscribe. Check out our podcast, the Talamaya game, with Dank DM, Liam Lowry, and Declan Keane. And yeah, if you've enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe and comment and do all of those cool YouTube things. And I will see you next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.